One of those tiny things that pays off constantly. It will wear at the same rate as the rest of the jeans. Wish I could drill into my past self. And it has to do with this little jar. Using a dummy needle. Fewer skipped stitches, less jamming. The majority of my trim stash has been built up that way. It's very often thrown away, but it has excellent, super long and strong zippers. Hi, in this video, I'm going to share 10 things your future self will thank you for. I've been sewing for over 15 years. I taught myself how to sew, winged literally everything. I managed to get myself into fashion school. That's where I learned the proper ways to do all the things that I was winging and struggling with before. After that, I worked full-time in the fashion industry and now I'm working for myself. Obviously, I've learned a lot about sewing and construction over the years. But what I want to talk about today are the small little habits that I've picked up on the way that aren't necessarily covered in tutorials, books, or beginner guides. I'm talking about the tiny little things that I've built into my workflow that constantly make me think, I am so glad that past me thought of this. Some are very actionable steps that you can do right now if you have half an hour or an hour to spare today. Others are small little habits that you can implement while you're working on your next project. So here are 10 things you can do today to make your sewing easier tomorrow or any other day in the future. Let's start with the first one, which I would like to call anticipating ahead. Because there are some things that you can already consider building into your project before you start it, which will make alterations and repairs easier in the future. The first one, of course, being the type of seam and finish that you're using. A seam without top stitching is much easier and quicker to alter than a seam with top stitching. One less step to remove and add back in once you're done with your alterations. A seam that's pressed open, where the seam allowances are finished separately, is also slightly easier to alter than a seam where the seam allowances are pressed to the side and finished together. And both of those are, of course, far easier to alter than a flat felt seam, which is a seam finish I love and use all the time. But if you know upfront that you might want to alter the seam, maybe it's better to avoid that one. So essentially, think ahead and think about which seams in a garment you might want to change in the future and choose your seam finish accordingly. Another thing is the width of the seam allowance. A wider seam allowance means that you could easily let the seams out a little in the future. For example, if you sew a pair of jeans with 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on both of the side seams, you can very easily give yourself 2 centimeters of extra space in the future if you were to re-sew that seam at 1 centimeter. And you can push that even further if you need even more room, but make sure that you leave yourself at least 0.5 centimeter of seam allowance to make sure that your seams stay strong. Beyond size alterations, you can also think ahead for repairs. One thing you can consider is cutting a small patch from your fabric scraps and sewing this, like hiding it somewhere, on the inside of the garment. For instance, on the pocket bags, somewhere in the hem. So you always have matching fabric on hand if you ever need to do a repair. Of course, you can also save these scraps elsewhere, but this tip is specifically useful for denims, because denim develops that worn and washed look over time. Even a scrap from the exact same fabric that you use to sew a pair of jeans can look completely different a few years down the line. Or well, your scrap stayed the same, but your jeans have been washed over and over again and they develop that worn and washed look. But if you would sew that patch on the inside of those jeans, it will wear at the same rate as the rest of the jeans, which will help make it blend in much better if you're after one of those satisfying invisible repairs. Similarly, you can sew a button on the inside of a garment, just like you will sometimes find in store-bought clothing. Personally, I like to store my spare buttons separately with a good labeling system, but if you want to make sure that the button will never lose sight of the shirt it belongs to, this could be a good option. Or if you're sewing a garment as a gift, this can be a great way to empower the recipient to handle any future repairs themselves. And one last tiny thing that falls under anticipating ahead, one that I always love my past self for, is when I remember to plug in my iron before I sew my first seam. So it's already heated up by the time I need it. Such a small thing, but it's always so satisfying when you remember to do it. The second one is about project prepping, setting yourself up for a smooth sewing session before it even begins. Specifically, breaking down the process in small steps and seeing if there's any that you already want to tackle the day before. Say it's Friday night, you just got home after a long week of work and you're planning on spending your entire Saturday sewing. Instead of losing a lot of momentum doing prep work on Saturday, maybe there are some things that you could already do today. So you can start sewing first thing tomorrow morning, like making sure your fabric is pre-washed and ironed, ready to be cut, or maybe you already want to get all the cutting done on Friday so you can start sewing first thing in the morning. If you're making a garment where a lot of pieces need interfacing, You could already take care of that the night before. But also think of preparing your machines. Threading it in the right color, doing some test stitches to figure out the right needle, stitch length, tension, etc. And if you have a computerized machine that resets all of its settings once it's switched off, remember to write them down after testing so you don't need to start from scratch in the morning. And don't forget that you can already wind up your bobbins in the color that you need, maybe even a few of them if you expect to need a lot of thread, which brings me into the next tip. Batch prepping. Because whenever I wind bobbins, I don't just prep one, I wind several in one go. It's usually white and black, easy colors that I use very often, so I'll usually wind at least 3 in one go. You do need to have enough bobbins for your machine to do this. Of course, you don't want to use up every single one that you have on hand. But if you have some spare ones available, batch winding is one of those tiny things that pays off constantly. It takes such little time to add another one while you're already winding bobbins. And having a full new one on hand definitely softens the pain a bit, for me at least, when you run out of bobbin thread midway into a seam. The same batch prep logic also works for notions, specifically interfacing. Every once in a while, I'll sit down and cut strips of interfacing in the width that I commonly use. So I can just easily grab that and put interfacing on a button band, for instance, without having to pull out the big piece of interfacing and cut my strips while my entire table is already filled with my current project that I'm working on. I also like to cut small patches at the same time, which I use to reinforce buttonholes or inside corners. And whenever I have interfacing left after cutting a project, say I've cut out a color and a color sand, you often have some random shaped offcuts. Don't throw those away. I also cut those up into strips or patches or whatever I can fit into those shapes and add them to my stash, reducing waste. And I'm setting myself up for efficiency in the future. While I'm at it, I often also like to go through my scraps bin and cut some reinforcement patches. For things like eyelets and grommets in a waistband, I always reinforce them on the inside with an extra layer of denim or a similar weight as the fabric that I'm using at that moment. This gives the hardware more to grab onto and makes them less likely to be pulled out over time. So while I'm already in prep mode with the interfacings, I also cut some patches from my fabrics. Other things worth looking for in your fabric scraps are things like thin wovens. Maybe you can cut some strips of binding, or scraps from knit fabrics that you can use to cut some strips of binding for knits. Tiny, tidy tasks. This next one is less about prep and a little bit more about how you work while you sew, but it's already made a huge difference in how my space feels while I'm sewing. And it has to do with this little jar. I recently learned that this jar actually has a name. It's called an ORTS jar, ORTS, which stands for Offcut Random Threads. I love learning new sewing lingo that someone came up with one day and everyone just decided to roll with it. If you still don't have a clue what I'm even talking about, it's just a little jar to collect thread scraps and offcuts while you're sewing to keep your table clean. If you're working on a project with a seam finish that requires a lot of trimming of seam allowances, like flat felt seams or French seams, then I usually grab an even bigger bowl to collect all of those trimmings and offcuts as well. It's such a simple thing, but for me it really helps to avoid every service being this explosion of threads and scraps and offcuts mess everywhere at the end of the day. I'm very fortunate to have a dedicated sewing space in this apartment, but at the end of the day, this is also the middle of our living room. So I always make an effort to keep my sewing mess somewhat contained while I'm working here. And I also put a lot of effort into putting things back where they belong after I'm done using them. I think of notions, interfacing, spare buttons, the sewing equivalent of don't put it down, put it away. Tip number 5 is about taking notes. This is something I wish I could drill into my past self whenever I didn't do this. Every time you finish a project, write something down. Because 6 months from now, you might not remember which size you made, whether you made any adjustments, and if there are specific things that you already know that you might want to do different in the future. You can keep it super simple, write down some notes on a piece of paper and keep that with the paper patterns of the pattern that you just used. Or some people keep a dedicated notebook with notes about all of their projects and the things they made, as well as inspiration. Or you can use an app like Threadloop, in which you can log private notes about a project only you can see, or you can make public notes that everyone can see for things that might help them if they ever want to make the same pattern that you just made. But note-taking doesn't stop at the garment level. You can also collect notes on construction methods, techniques, or tutorials that you found very helpful. After years of sewing, I have most construction methods stored right over here, but as I was learning how to knit last year, I noticed that I was constantly looking up video tutorials for the exact same techniques. Had done them once, a couple months ago and had already forgotten how they worked. And very often I had this specific video in mind that I wanted to find because I remembered that they explained it in a way that was very clear for me to understand. And then I couldn't find that exact tutorial anymore. So once I had that a couple of times, I started saving them, creating playlists for myself, or logging them in external note-taking tools, and that made it so much easier for me. Think of it as building your personal library, a database with your favorite techniques, construction methods, and just things that you want to remember. Today, you're always going to know more about that project you just finished than 6 months from now. Write it down before you forget. This next one is going to be very niche, very specific, but I think everyone should have a needle system. I didn't have one for the longest of time, never thought of it, but ever since I started implementing the system, I love it. Basically, any kind of system, however simple or complex you want to make it, that's all up to you, but some kind of system to keep track of the needles in your sewing machine. It's easy to find the size of the needle that you're currently using, but sometimes it's harder to tell the exact type that you put in your machine. Was it a stretch needle or was it a ballpoint needle? Was it a microtex needle or an extra fine needle? But also how long it's been in there, how much it's already been used, etc. My current system is that I'm using a dummy needle. This is an old discarded needle that I painted red with nail polish. And this needle lives in the slot of the needle that I'm currently using in my machine. So I'm currently using a ballpoint needle. Whenever I switch needles and I take that one out and put in another one, I just move the dummy needle to the other case. Simple as that. This system makes it so much easier for me to keep track of which needle is in the machine, because an empty slot can sometimes also just mean that the needle has been discarded. On top of that, I always work through my needle boxes from left to right. And if I put a needle back after using it, I put the used ones backwards, so I can always tell which ones have been used before and which ones haven't, if I want to start a project with a completely fresh needle. So this system works really well for me, but there's so many other ways that you can do this. I've seen a pincushion ones that you can put your used but not ready to be thrown out needles in there and kind of sort them into the type and size that the needle is. Looks very useful as well. There are also various types of organizers, some specifically for needles, but just any organizer box will do. Or if you're someone who loves a good spreadsheet, you can also track everything that way and even add details like how long it's been used, for how many projects, for which fabrics. I'm absolutely the type of person who loves spreadsheets and tracking many different things, but for needles, the dummy needle system works really well for me. So I'm sticking with that for now. And a bonus tip is to dispose of your needles responsibly. Don't throw anything sharp like needles or pins straight into the bin. I keep all of my bent, dull, broken pins and needles into my needle graveyard. And when I've collected a bunch, I dispose of all of them safely. Whenever I have something that is worn beyond repair, I take a critical look before it goes into the bin to see if there's anything I can salvage. Hardware, zippers, trims, maybe even the fabric itself. Honestly, the majority of my trim stash has been built up that way. I don't buy a lot, but I do harvest a lot. And try to think outside of the box. Long zippers, like this one or this one, these are extremely expensive to buy. They can easily go up to 6, 7, 8, 10 euros each. These lengths will definitely be like 10 euros, I suppose. But you know what's very often thrown away, but it has excellent, super long and strong zippers? Suitcases. A couple of zippers in here are harvested that way. This one, for instance, has the two little loops on the zipper pullers so that you can lock them together with a padlock. I removed a couple from an old suitcase that my partner was about to throw out. And one time I even removed one from a completely broken suitcase that I found on the street on bulk trash collection day here in Amsterdam. They're great. I just ripped it out and now I have a very long zipper that I can use for whatever future project I need a long zipper for. Okay, this next one I wrote down is to buy in bulk. And it overlaps a little bit with what we just talked about and with saving money. But there's another benefit in the fact that future you needs to do way less last-minute supply runs. And once again, you have everything you need on hand. The key is to only buy in bulk those things that you know that you will use very regularly. And of course, also only if your budget and your space allows for it. So, thread is a great example. Big cones are always cheaper per meter than small spools. If you sew regularly, getting white and black on big cones is very often worth it. Find a brand that you like first, try a few small spools, find your favorite brand, and then you can commit to a big cone. Elastic for waistbands or waistband interfacing is another one. If you always buy in small standard increments, say a meter at a time, and you only use 80, maybe 90 centimeters of it, you're going to be left with these small scraps that are sometimes not really useful anymore for anything. But in that specific example, if you would have bought 5 meters at once, you essentially get a 6th waistband for free. Plus, you always have some on hand for spontaneous projects. The same goes for interfacing, both interfacing on a roll, this is waistband interfacing, but also interfacing that you buy by the meter. I'm still working through the interfacing I bought during my last few years of fashion school, which was about 10 years ago by now. I bought a few meters of several varieties and I still haven't run out yet. Labeling your stash is kind of similar to tip 5 about taking notes, but this time I want to talk about things that you're about to put away in terms of storage, because again, 6 months from now, you will not remember. A couple of examples of things that I like to label. Specialty thread bobbins. I recently tried Mettler Seriflex for the first time, and this is a sewing thread that has built-in stretch, which allows you to sew knit fabrics with a straight stitch. You use it both in the top thread as well as in the bobbin, so I had this bobbin wound up with Seriflex right now, and it looks different from regular sewing thread, but to make sure that I absolutely wouldn't mix it up or just forget what was on this bobbin, I decided to just label it very clearly. Another example is fabric yardage. I bought these 2 rolls of fabric a couple of months ago, and they each had about 7 to 10 meters of fabric on there, I think. I pre-washed the entire length, ironed it, and then rolled it back onto those rolls to store them until I wanted to use them. But while rolling it back on here, I made a very small mark in the selvage on the sides at every meter. So that way I can very easily figure out exactly how much is left on here after I've cut out 1 or 2 projects. And I was very happy that I thought of that. And as you can see here, I also use these labels for my fabrics. I also use those for the fabrics that I keep in boxes for my fabric stash. And these labels are from Kylie and the Machine, and they come on these tape rolls. So you just have 1 continuous roll of tape and you cut off 1 section to label your fabrics. You can note the fiber content, the size, width and length, where you source it from, whether it's pre-washed, and some additional notes. These are very popular in the sewing community and for good reason. There's one thing that annoys me about the checkboxes for pre-washing though, because it has a checkbox for yes and no. But pre-washing is not a fixed state, it's a step that happens. Once it's pre-washed, it cannot go back to not being pre-washed, but the other way around you can. And I didn't want to constantly be crossing out my X in the no checkbox. And speaking of pre-washing, some people will wash every fabric even before it goes into their stash. That's also a great habit. It means that every fabric is completely ready to be used whenever you need it. Definitely a future you will thank you move. The very last one, maintenance is probably the least glamorous, but maybe also the most important. Take care of your tools and they will take care of you. Clean your machines regularly, oil them if they need it, get them serviced on a regular basis, get your scissors sharpened, and don't forget to replace the blade on your rotary cutter. A well-maintained machine gives you fewer skipped stitches, less jamming, less frustrations and interruptions while you are in the middle of your sewing project. And a sharp pair of scissors makes cutting feel quite effortless and way less exhausting. These aren't exciting tasks, but every time you sit down and everything just works, that might just be the biggest favor you can give your future self. So that's it. None of them are huge, no big time or money investments. They're just small habits that compound over time, and that will hopefully make your sewing feel easier, smoother, and more enjoyable. Now, I would love to know if you have also identified any of these kinds of things in your sewing workflow. Little things that while you're doing them, you know that your future self is going to be so happy that you did them. Please let me know in the comments all of your habits that you swear by, and let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video. I have a few more video ideas similar to this one in mind, so if you enjoyed it, please let me know, and then I'll make sure to work on those in the future. And I'm also still working on the video about truing pattern pieces that I promised at the end of my Waterloo review video. I've been slowly chipping away at that one over the past few months. It slowly turned into a much bigger video than I initially anticipated, but it's still coming. And I also have some other very exciting content coming soon. At least I'm very excited about it because I'm going to be moving in a month from now, which is part of the reason I've been so inactive over here on YouTube these past couple of months. Hopefully, once I'm settled into my new sewing space, I can pick up the pace again and make some new videos. For now, I want to thank you for watching this video. Please tell me what you thought and if you have any other habits that you would recommend me to try out. See you in the next one.